Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Resilient Rehab Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Effer, and today we're going to be talking about low back pain and disc herniations. And this is kind of a two-parter. We have a question that's being asked by a therapist, by a physical therapist, and I'm also working with a client who currently has a disc herniation, kind of in the chronic stages, not really acute stages. And there is a difference. When they're acute stages, everything is very nervy, everything is very uncomfortable. This is more chronic stuff. So this is like positional based. Sometimes they feel certain discomforts doing certain movements. Maybe there's a flare up. But I thought I'd take the time to kind of describe what my thought process is about it. This is not an attempt to fix all disc herniations, and this is not a one-size-fits-all approach. But I thought I'd just cover a little bit about what my thought process was with this person. Maybe it'll help you, maybe it'll help understand a little bit. So I hope you find some benefit from it. So this client came to me, they had a disc herniation, and the disc herniation was a posterior, which means going out the back, and lateral, going out to the back and the side. So it could be a posterior where it's going backwards. So this is like people when they flex their spine, the jelly donut goes back, or it could be anterior when they extend their spine, it could be going forward. And this is going to be a posterior going backwards and out towards the side. And that's a really important thing to ask. Which direction is it going? Is it just going straight back or is it going out towards the side and more on this oblique angle, not directly out to the side, but a slight angle? The reason why it's important is because it tells me there is some degree of rotation going through the pelvis potentially. And so again, I'm not going to sit here and be like, okay, well, biomechanics is the only reason why someone maybe experienced pain in this situation. This is not. This is just me talking about what I have found to be an effective strategy and what I've been using with this client to get some results. So, posterior lateral. Pain on the right side when they bend over and touch their toes. And they feel the pain mostly around the lower part, which indicates to me that there's probably some degree of orientation happening at the bottom where everything just kind of dumps forward. They don't have the ability to shift back into their hips in order to bend over to touch their toes, which is a major thing that I want to see with the toe touch. Now, again, this is chronic stage. This is not acute stage. I probably wouldn't get somebody to bend over, touch their toes if they're in a flare-up. It's not what I'm going to do. I'm going to use other measurements. But now, usually when I take a step back and think of this overarching theme of how a disc bulge could happen, one of the main things that I'm thinking about is, especially if it's on one side, we have an inability to yield on that side. So think of it this way. If I've got a pelvis turning towards the right, I need the muscles on the back part of my right side to open. I need the pelvis to rotate in towards that side. I need the spine to turn towards that side. If for some reason I cannot do that, those muscles are stiff, they're pushing the pelvis towards the left, the back is arched on that right side, well, something has to yield and relax in order to allow for that rotation to happen because my body's still trying to do it for whatever reason, right? And so that's when that disc starts to yield. So these are people who have a pelvis that is probably being squeezed forward. Maybe we're missing motion in a lot of different angles, right? Maybe it's hip flexion, maybe it's hip extension, likely is both of those, but maybe it's internal, external, abduction, adduction. They're just missing everything. There's a lot of stiffness, so they're moving from above the pelvis. Everything is pushed forward. Now, here is the thing. Even though I'm saying everything's pushed forward, if we're to bring them back too far too fast, you're going to kick on symptoms again because they're going to try to yield from that spot. And so if we think about low back pain in general, let's take a step back from the disc bulge. Low back pain in general, that's a lot of load going to the lower back, right? There's a lot of load that is being hit at the lower back. So we have to figure out how can we distribute force over a greater area? How can we distribute the force so that it's not going into one spot? And I always ask for the finger test. It's like, okay, where do you feel it? Can you point to where you feel it? Sometimes people will be like, I feel it right there. Other times it'd be like, it's in this general area. Which, if it's more of this focal load, I know that a lot of things are being squeezed, and that is where they're hinging from specifically. That is where they're trying to produce force from at that one particular area. Whereas if it's more of a circle, more of a greater area across the lower back, then I know that this is a distribution problem. They're not able to distribute force. And so really it's not so much about rotation as it is about, let's just bring everything back. And when we bring things back, that's when things start to improve a little bit. But when it comes to disc bulge, we have to be careful. We can't bring them back too much. If you were to bring her back, turning towards the right, if I were to say, okay, we're going to shift into that right hip and keep on shifting and shifting, where do you think she's going to shift? She's got all this tension in the lower part of the pelvis that is pushing everything forward. She's going to be yielding through that lower back. It's not going to feel very good. So we have to think about, again, our assessment measurements are going to tell us what the position of the pelvis is, right? Pain is going to determine if we're rotating too much or we're moving too far forward. And there's kind of like a fine line. We don't want to move too far back. We also want to move too far forward. So there's kind of like this little in between that we have to work within. But the big thing that really helps with a lot of these people, and especially with her, in my experience, the people I've worked with, is trying to get them that mid stance back, trying to get them that internal rotation. And that internal rotation is going to be the thing that's going to allow them to distribute force better. They're going to have their foot that's more pronated. Their knee is going to bend more. Their hip is going to be able to flex and internally rotate. Their abdomen is going to be able to close, which is going to allow for the sacrum to move and create space and rotation. So that's a main thing. And this is exactly why exercises like the bird dogs really do help with these people. Especially, for example, if I were to keep the right knee on the ground as the left leg goes back and forth, that is going to keep that right leg into mid stance as the pelvis is rocking back and forth, right? The quadruped position. Side planks, the same thing. They really help with these people, again, in the chronic stages, non-acute stages, because they start to create this internal rotation. They get the obliques, they get the muscles to be the anterior glute med and all these other muscles that are going to laterally compress the pelvis to create space front to back. And also, like Stu McGill talks about his big three, even the sit-up exercise, it's a mid-stance exercise. So reinforcing decompression on that side, creating internal rotation of that right side is going to be a major benefit in order to start to reduce these symptoms. So for example, if I were to put this person with a right posterior lateral disc bulge in a split squat with the left leg forward, right leg back, it probably won't feel very good. If I flip it around where the right foot's going forward, left foot's going back, again, I got to position these things in different ways, kind of find a position that feels good. Heels elevated probably is not going to feel very good, but maybe something like a front foot elevated may feel good, especially if they're supported. Maybe they're holding on to a TRX or something like that. We're going to start to create that yielding effect in the pelvis so it doesn't have to happen at the back. We're creating that internal rotation, doing crossover walking, crossover step-ups, doing exercises where I am walking backwards, really emphasizing shifting maybe into one side, not going too far down, holding a squat position, holding a split squat position, doing cable chops. Exercises that are going to get me into that early mid stance is going to be great. Again, we have to be careful. We have to, in terms of using gravity, maybe standing exercises, maybe we build them off the ground. It's kind of typically what I like to do anyway. I like to start them on the ground where gravity is not a main player and then start to bring them up. But that's part of my assessment process. It's like, does this movement feel uncomfortable on the ground? Does it feel uncomfortable on the side? How about quadruped? How about half kneeling? How about split squat? How about standing? How about walking? We're starting to increase gravity on the body and just see, like, does this amount of gravity cause discomfort? And then we work below it and we start to build them up against gravity. And so disc bulge are very tricky. They're probably one of the least things I like to work with, only because they can be so finicky and they're so different for everybody. But if you were just to take a look at disc bulge and look at the images on the internet, you'll see what I'm talking about. You'll see a disc that looks like the posterior lateral, or one side of the back looks like the disc is bulging that way. And then that is the same principles as rotation within the rib cage, within the pelvis, and every joint. That kind of fluid shift is the same thing in every single joint. We just don't want to do it at a joint that can't rotate very well, right? So again, this is not medical advice, and should not be used as a blanket statement for everyone. This is just based on my experience of what I found to be effective for the people that I work with. And even though I'm talking about disc bulge, just think about this in general in terms of a rotational issue. This is just the same thing. It's just the disc is creating this yielding effect versus where we want it to be, in the pelvis, where we can distribute force in a greater area. I hope this helped. I hope this clarified a little bit. Thank you so much for your questions. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Don't forget to like, save, comment. If you could write a review, that would mean a lot. This information out to as many coaches, therapists, and people as possible. Thank you so much, and I will see you next time.